Welcome to another edition of the Pure Signal podcast, where we bring you the latest and greatest on everything AI, machine learning, data, transformation, orchestration, all the buzzwords you can think of. We talk about them here on the podcast. My name is Ryan Medellin, a marketing solutions manager here at Credera, and as always, joined by my favorite people in the whole wide world, my co-host, our Global Chief Product Officer, Jake Carter. Hello, Mr. Carter.
Hello, hello.
And our North America CEO, Kevin Erickson. Kevin, how we doing?
I'm doing great.
That's great to hear.
I just love the fact that we're amongst our favorite people in the world. That makes me really happy this morning. And so we have a guest with us that we like as well. And so it's a good day.
Yeah, speaking of guests, without further ado, the guests keep coming here on the podcast. This is what we do. We bring you the best, and we will not settle for less. Let's welcome in Paul Nichols to the Pure Signal podcast. Paul, great to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time here on this early Friday morning when we're recording this session. Give us 30 seconds. Who is Paul Nichols?
We're gonna need more than 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I'm Paul Nichols. I'm a principal at Credera. I lead the Marketing Data and Analytics Foundation go to market. That's where we work with our clients, work with our other agencies to help figure out the right alignment and strategy for how to begin establishing that data foundation for activating cool use cases, AI, things of that nature. It starts simple and then it builds into more complex things. The idea is really to seek complexity instead of complicatedness. So I think there's a distinction between those two things. And our work is really centered around how to help clients get to that state a lot faster than if they're just doing it themselves, obviously. And then really thinking about what the future is and the value activation of those activities instead of just infrastructure. It's not about infrastructure, it's about outcomes.
Yeah.
Paul,
Jake?
I was doing a little bit of research before this. We'll talk a lot about the data and the
Sure, of
MarTech,
course.
but I think one of the fun things about your background is this is not what you've been doing your whole career. Do you mind giving us the quick sketch of all of the fun things you've done?
Yeah, so I started in professional services in my early 20s, but not in the management consulting and technology. I was in the music business. But because I had those contacts in the industry, I began working more on the production side. So I spent about 20 years or so in production, working in studios, working for labels, mostly working with other producers, creating music to then sell to other labels and other producers to take for their acts to then turn into music you'd hear on the radio and things of that nature. But, that world really changed, right? It began to almost immediately after I got involved professionally, that world changed quite a bit. So I began to slightly pivot more back towards technology, and I got into software. I designed a calculator for designing room acoustics, which is a fairly complex but understood process. So I didn't invent the science, but I did come up with my partner Adam Lockhart. We came up with the first calculator available on a mobile device for acousticians and engineers to use to design those things. So in addition to running my own production facility, my own manufacturing arm of that facility, I was able to then go work back for small business, and I worked for a startup as the director of marketing for academic software. And then that turned into an exit opportunity for us, which then led to me going back to business school, getting a master's, and then that opened up a lot of doors and contacts in Dallas. And eventually one of those contacts introduced me to Scott Covington, and then Scott offered me a job on the spot at Credera, which was fantastic. And I really began to feel passionate about that, the back to marketing and back to sales, which is truly my background. And so beginning to sort of switch out of management consulting purely more into the technical side is where the road to how I'm doing the things I'm doing today, more on the data and more on the engineering side.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
But I have a couple of questions.
Sure, of course. Go for it.
So one, there might be some of our listeners that don't know what a radio is. And so, we might have to remind people of that.
That's right.
Yeah. And then two, you're talking about all these really cool stuff to do, but as we're nearing the end of the World Cup, you're forgetting the fact that you played professional soccer also in your early stage while you were doing producing, working for acts like Beyonce, whatever else you were working at,
right.
Taylor Swift, I believe. But you were moving up the world on that. So we do need to hear about some of your soccer escapades, and then And then apparently, I don't know who Phil Lockhart is. He's a little bit of our white whale. We've tried for many, many years to get him on our show. So I'm not exact. Maybe we can go through you to get him onto our podcast here. So.
I know where his
Gateway guest.
I know where his kids play hockey.
Well, there you go.
We'll just show up.
Yeah, my son a couple of summers ago did a hockey camp with the Stars, and Phil and I would run into each other outside of work, and I would say we've developed a friendship outside of work anyways. He's one of those guys that I just inherently trust, and actually same with the two of you. And so anyways, yeah, so back to, I played in a pickup team, and we played in a few games, and one of the things that happened was this team was formed, and I didn't realize it at the time, as sort of like the Washington Generals versus like the Globetrotters. So when these big clubs in Holland, which if you think about a big club in Holland, it's nothing compared to the size of a big club in like England or Spain. What I began to realize that everybody else already knew is that we were playing against teams mostly composed of prospects that were being evaluated by these bigger clubs. And so I was getting sort of exposure to what that level was. And I actually rose to it. Now, I'd played in the center of defense most of my life, but once I stopped growing at 5'7", you're no longer going to play in that position. So I moved into midfield. And then in college, I was converted as a forward. So going to Holland, they didn't play me in the middle.
Goalkeeper in Holland.
Yeah, like I don't even know that. I don't know that I could even play like in a hockey goal, you know. But I started playing on the wings more, and that was more tuned to my skill set of just getting the ball wide, coming in and shooting at random. In any case, I ended up getting scouted by Leicester City. From here, it's kind of a shorter part of the story where it was like one thing kind of led to another, and I built up this sort of minor credibility as a potential player. And so even, I would get indirectly scouted by teams. And so eventually I moved back to Texas, and there was a consolidation of a couple. And again, when we say professional, it's not MLS, right? It's not something like that. But there are like multiple professional leagues that are regional, and those leagues were beginning to consolidate. And so they'd have tournaments. So the team that I played on made it into that division. And so technically, became professionally registered as a soccer player.
Nice.
And then in another game later on that following season in a tournament, to get promoted to even the next level up, I did something for the first time ever in my life. I missed a penalty kick. I missed two in a game, and we lost. And I just was so frustrated. And I was getting older. I could really feel all those injuries coming back. And I'd already met my wife, and I knew I wanted to have a family with her. And I really kind of had to ask myself that question of, do I want to be that dad that like can't play with his kids because of a sports injury that was really stupid in his like early 30s? Or, do I want to like start taking care of myself, listen to my body, and sort of have a life that goes beyond sort of this, contract organization of like, I'm doing all this like spec work for clients and I'm doing all this other stuff. So a lot of life choices sort of kind of began to present themselves. And, that's kind of where I ended up with several decisions on what to do with my career as well. So finding an organization like Credera. And I think one of the things that really benefited me as part of that was I met about 8 partners before I joined the firm. And
they all offer you jobs?
You didn't.
So 7 of 8.
I know which one had the actual authority to offer you jobs.
That's right. But, I'd met them like indirectly, and, I came in several times, and I had my own business. And one of the challenges was when Credera was ready for me to come in, I had a client. Or whenever that client finished, Credera was like, okay, we're not ready yet. There was always like this sort of push-pull aspect. And, as part of like what I was doing on the outside in the startup world, I just sold one of the startups I'd co-founded. And so I told Leslie, I was like, hey, I'm not going to work for 9 months. You've got 9 months to find me a window. Because I really wanted to be a part of the organization, but, because of the timing, maybe that was also like my knees telling me, hey, maybe it's time to look elsewhere for fun. But then it worked out, And I remember, Kevin, you pulled me in one day and you were like, it's like our 4th or 5th conversation. And you said something to me that I think my only people that knew me as well as like my dad would have said to me, which was, the only question I have about you is, will you thrive in an organization where you lack authority? And I walked out of that conversation. I was like, that dude is insightful. I can learn so much from him. And I never saw you again until today.
There you go. Well, how about that? Well, so the headline of all that is you missed 2 penalty shots. Therefore, you decide that you're hanging up the cleats.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we have you as long as you sell the next startup, because apparently that is also part of the story.
That's right, yeah.
And then obviously we have been thrilled that you've been here for so many years and driving all kinds of cool stuff. With that, my friend, let's get back to whatever.
That was fun, though.
I feel like there's so many different threads I can pull there. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. We used to say about Paul, he's still a very interesting guy, but you're the most interesting guy in the world.
Yeah.
You would never know what you would pull out of this rabbit hat of his background.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned, Ryan, earlier was we're in the early stages of the World Cup. And it kind of got me thinking. There's been a few games, and I don't want to talk about the knockout stage because I don't know if our listeners are caught up yet. I know we're in the middle of July. But I was thinking about like the group stages, and I was thinking about some of the topics of conversation we could have today. And I'm not one of those people that's going to like have a hobby and then like make sure that everything I say is through the lens of that hobby. But I was watching a couple of games in the group stage, and it really got me kind of thinking about like organizational change and some of the alignment issues that I run into or clients run into before they reach out to us or as part of our due diligence or early stages of a project or any sort of like workshop. And that was more around like, how do you affect change and transformation in an organization that maybe isn't ready for it or that has a culture where they're comfortable with the way things are in isolation. But when you look at the grand scheme, it maybe isn't all that organized. And, we talk about like fragmentation, like with data or like duplicative systems. But also we looked at that same thing, and it's not unusual for us to also see fragmented organization, fragmented processes, or multiple people doing multiple things that are the same. And that's where I sort of was back in the group stages looking at two particular games, South Korea versus South Africa, and then England versus Ghana. Those two games sort of reminded me of like what it's like, sort of going through these challenges. And I don't want to like, belabor the point, and I know we just talked about soccer, but in both those games, superior teams, right? South Korea superior to South Africa on paper. England superior to most teams on paper and often on the field as well. But both those games sort of presented a duality of sort of like what we see. And they were, what do you do when you're facing a challenge or an opposition that's super tight, compact, stubborn, organized, and their purpose is to prevent you from being successful. Now, organizations don't behave that way on purpose, but they could be set up that way, as part of what happens when that fragmentation exists for 3, 4, 5, 20 years, with legacy systems or legacy orgs. So when I was watching the like South Korea versus South Africa game, right? Those two, the South African team was organized in a way that we would describe as like a low block or parking the bus, where they get all 11 players behind the ball, working as one kind of like organism, one unit, and just shifting side to side, front to back, without much depth, to just prevent South Korea from, penetrating. And England faced the same thing with Ghana. But both England and South Korea failed to overcome those things for different reasons, but they're common reasons. South Korea did everything right, except they didn't put their best player on the field when they started the game. And so they did every run correctly, every pass correctly, but there was no focal point to convert those opportunities into something that mattered. So they ended up with a lot of kilometers, covered by I think the average distance was like 12 and a half, 13 kilometers. It's like,
I looked it up last night. Yes. It's like 6 to 8 miles, which would translate to roughly that.
A near sprint, right? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty impressive. And nothing to show for it, right? With the England game, it was kind of a different situation. Ghana, same way, super organized. And if you ever want to like watch a masterclass on how to beat a superior team, watch what Ghana did against England in the group stages. England had $1 bajillion worth of talent on the field, like world class in every single position that was out there. But what happened was when they faced that opposition, they didn't do the incisive runs and passing and direct play. All they did was they kept possession and they worked the ball. And they had this mentality of like control. and mentality of patience. But a low block, they love that. They want you to pass the ball around and have all the possession in the world. Just don't play direct. Don't put the ball into the box. Don't attack us. And it was really frustrating to watch that because over the years, like under the management of Gareth Southgate, that's how they played almost every game. And it was really hard to watch. But then under Thomas Tuchel, like they began to play with more pizzazz, more speed. And then once that didn't work within the first like 30 seconds of the game, they reverted back to this patient play. And they never had a real chance to score a goal in that game. And, you know, it was just like you're watching it and you're like, play direct, move the ball forward. And you see the same thing with organizations that are like too comfortable with analysis. Well, we got a dashboard for everything. Yeah, but if you have possession and you don't score, it doesn't matter how much possession you have. It doesn't matter how much you know about your business unless you do something about it. You know, and that's kind of where I started to see that sort of like that parallel is, you know, you've got organizations that they want to win. They want to do those things. And maybe they are making a lot of the right effort, but they don't have that focal point. They don't have that activation point where it actually matters. And I've thought through a few examples of similar things that happened, you know, publicly. So I've got a few that are like personal, you know, client stories from us, and I've blinded those because, you know, I want to make sure that we're being fair. But at the same time, there's a few public examples as well. And I think the two that come to mind, you mentioned Taylor Swift earlier. So one is the Taylor Swift Ticketmaster kind of fiasco, and then the other is Ocean Spray, which a few years ago had an incredible moment. And it's sort of what the difference is between two organizations, that one is prepared to move at the speed of the market and one isn't. So with Ticketmaster and Taylor Swift, and I'll give you guys a second to talk in an hour. With Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster, every signal imaginable, conceivable was there. They understood, they knew exactly how many, you know, they knew how much money they were going to make. They knew where it was going to come from and everything else. When the sale went live, every Ticketmaster channel crashed. It was unprepared to handle that aspect. So the signals were there, but the operations weren't. And there was a massive disconnect and hopefully a lesson learned. On the Ocean Spray side, you may remember a number of years ago, there was that dude whose truck broke down and he was on his longboard.
Yeah.
And he's carrying a radio.
Fleetwood.
I don't remember
He was
this one.
drinking Ocean Spray and listening to Fleetwood Mac, the song Dreams.
Yeah.
And it became this massive thing. And if I want to know how massive it got, you know, Fleetwood Mac is one of the most toxic bands to ever exist. Like the first paragraph of their Wikipedia page is like, what? So when a band like that, or they're not a band anymore really, they leaned into it. They got involved. They started, you know, doing this, participating, you know, on their own behalf to like amplify this guy's message and his sort of vibe. So did Ocean Spray and so did Nissan. So both those organizations leaned into the viral aspect of it, and they had no issue with that moment. The moment that on TikTok began to trend, Ocean Spray was able to take that and capture it and turn it into months of value, you know, and they would, you think, oh, what's going to be the most like viable, you know, brand on social media next year? If someone would have said Ocean Spray, it'd be like, no, I'm sorry, it's not 1980. We're talking, you know, you would never think that, but there they were prepared to do it. And that's a remarkable story. Nissan got involved as well. They were like, oh, we're just going to give this guy a new truck. They did. They donated a truck. And now they've got that same brand lift. But the neat thing is, or not the neat thing, but Fleetwood Mac, I think Lindsey Buckingham and a few of the members had already sold their rights to their own music a number of years prior. But Mick Fleetwood hadn't. He still possessed all of his royalties and all of the ownership for publishing and the mechanical rights for all of his music. And there was a 374% surge on TikTok alone for monetary transactions for Fleetwood Mac music, and a surge of like 90% for streaming. And he took that as an opportunity to sell his stake at the highest possible point. And he made an absolute killing by being patient. He also, and his label and his, you know, his publishing were able to take advantage of that. Whereas in most cases, that industry doesn't necessarily move as quickly as you think. Like a Christmas record is typically recorded in the summer a year before you ever hear it. So, you know, my Christmas album slated for, you know, November of 2030, I would have finished it probably in 2028 at some point. So to think that like the legal teams and everything else were able to also move the same speed as like Ocean Spray and Nissan is pretty remarkable. So big organizations can do it. It's just really about having that alignment. And it goes back to like England. Well, did England play that game with a culture of being penetrative and being direct and playing their brains out? No. South Korea did, but they didn't have the right tools to make it actually convert into those opportunities. England lacked that belief and lacked that culture. So even though they had the tools, they didn't have the capability to actually take advantage of that. And I think that's something that we see pretty regularly with our clients.
I was just going to ask, what on something like that, like what's the split between proactive versus reactive, right? Because I think there's a lot of proactive things that companies can do to be ready for those types of moments that you would get with like the Ocean Spray or Nissan. But there's also like you're not sure what's going to happen, so you need to be prepared for anything at any time, like somebody riding a longboard and playing a Fleetwood Mac song with your product. Just talk to me about the proactive reactive approach, because I think there's a lot there.
Well, I think that comes strictly down to culture. You could be reactive in a timely and efficient manner if you run your entire business off of Excel. If you're aligned to and have the culture to be decisive and to move quickly, then you can do that. If you don't, if it takes 30 stakeholders to agree on what the right KPI is and another 20 to determine the right metric for when you are reactive to a viral moment, that sort of is evidence that you're probably not going to be able to capture the value that you need in that moment. Similarly, with the proactive aspect, I think that more as, again, we're proactive when we have a culture to take action when the opportunity arises. So yes, on a proactive side, having a implemented data strategy from ingestion to transformation to staging to activation, having something that's unified where your data is not scrambled, that can be activated on a MarTech platform, that's the proactive piece. It's part of the proactive piece. That just means that, unlike the South Korean team, you're able to take that opportunity and hit a button. Everything's ready to go. It's right there. And you can also see the results because you know what to look for because you're professionally managing this. And I would say that's like the unifying factor of all of that is having a culture to be active, right? That's part of a data strategy, and that's part of the alignment or North Star that we would talk about. But it starts simple. You lead with decisions. You don't lead with architecture in that sense. So if you have, it's one thing for me to say, just be aligned. Just have a strategy, have activation. Congratulations, you're now the world's best and most prepared marketing organization or enterprise for that matter. It doesn't really work that way. So it starts small. How do you prioritize the things that you're going to invest in? How do you prioritize and understand what problems are more important than the others that can necessitate maybe bringing in, a consulting arm to do something at an accelerated pace versus, business as usual. And that's usually the first fist of spaghetti I throw to the wall is how do you make decisions at your company? And it usually ends up looking like a plate of spaghetti. It's like all this different stuff. It's a lot of ad hoc things, not because they think that that's the right way to do it, but because over the course of a career or over the course of multiple transitions of technology and organization, that's just, maybe they're in the middle of a transformation and they have a target state and they're moving towards it, but they're not there yet. So all those things sort of lead, or it can be those like leading signals for an opportunity to take that a little bit further with the client. So it's about, one, how do you prioritize things? Two, who gets involved? What's the right level? And then I think most important thing, and it's the thing that's usually missing the most, is who's accountable, right? So if the three of you started working for me at Paulco, right? And, you each had an idea on what to do next. How are we going to invest our next, $5,000 in our startup, in our food truck? What's the next menu item that we're going to perfect? And you each have three different ideas. And we go through this exercise and figure out, we're going to go with like stuffed crust hot dogs or whatever, which I'm just,
I thought we were going to go with octopus.
Copyright that, right? But if no one's like staking their, accountability to that decision, then where does that accountability live? And so that you have to have that executive buy-in. Somebody has to have skin in the game. That's part of that that layer. And so that's why, you can see reams of documentation in like a Confluent site for a client of all of these processes for making a decision and all this stuff. But then like the actual decision itself links back to a 30-person group. It shouldn't be that way necessarily. I do think you need to have a name attached to it so that that person is ensuring that those things are done the way they want it to for the least amount of investment possible. So you would look at it and say, okay, we got these 3 ideas, right? Obviously, Kevin, you're from the Midwest, so the stuffed hot dogs are coming from Kevin. And then we're probably looking at salads, right? The
Obviously.
3 of us.
I was thinking barbacoa, but yeah.
Yeah, no.
Maybe on a salad.
Yeah, fatty cheek with, of course, it's perfect. And we're looking at those things, actually, I kind of forgot my point because I love making fun of Kevin. In fact, I was confused when I got the invite to join because I wasn't sure if it was the Pure Signal Credera podcast or Kevin's men's fragrance podcast called Smell You Later. I was unsure until I saw Ryan here, and I was like, okay, well,
That's legit now.
yeah.
Was it the same speaking notes either way?
Yeah,
it's
it
always
was.
the
Same
same.
anecdotes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing this World Cup discussion on every podcast I'm on
it's good.
this month. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the questions I had was, I'm sure that our Pure Signal listeners are also as curious, like, for Paul Co., where can we pre-order the 2030 holiday album? I mean, I want to make sure we can get that out for our listeners.
Well, the funny thing is, it's gonna end up on your Apple Music without you wanting it.
Yeah.
I got the same deal that U2 had, so it's just gonna be
really good.
pre-installed. You're gonna wake up one day and it's gonna be right there.
You're really doing a lot of callbacks on this. I'm racking my brain for all the memories, but no, I remember the U2
Well,
iPod.
no, it happened again. They did it again with their 2 albums they released for Good Friday and for Easter this year.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
I didn't
There you
catch
go.
that one. I'm remembering back to the one in like what, 05?
Yeah, the original Apple, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, yes.
Oh, do you
No,
gonna
I am please. I don't know where to go.
Okay, I love where you're going, Paul, I think. So I want to go back to what are the problems where are the places where organizations go wrong? So if I'm following you, you've mentioned a couple already. So you've mentioned hey, I've got the data, but I'm not maybe acting on it. I think that was I'm getting the signals, but I'm not making the decisive cuts. You mentioned I can't move at the speed of the market. And then where you were just going was maybe I'm not going to say the decision making, but maybe the ownership there.
Yeah, the accountability.
What are, like, if you have to bucket, like, hey, here's the 5 big problems that we typically see.
Yeah.
What are they?
It's a lot more, I would say more fun, but on your own, you can design all sorts of cool architecture and plans to ingest data using all the great resources that we have access to these days. I would say the core one comes down to the culture and the accountability and the decisioning. But let's say we've covered that, right? So the next would be data availability and then data unification. And by that, what I mean is oftentimes when we think of, these types of strategies or solutions, we think about coming up with a really cool, like MAP is one of our accelerators that we use to ingest data through an automated process, on all the major cloud platforms. And the thing is that most clients, I would say almost exclusive, it's edge cases where this isn't true. Most clients don't want that. What they often want or say they want is for us just to plug in to their marketing data lake and bring stuff in. And one, that requires about 2 months of access requests. So that's one. So right there, that's an indicator that that's a challenge for anybody in their organization. And then the second is, you guys, I think, came to my Christmas party, the Credera Christmas party at my house a number of years ago. I don't know if you opened up any of my kitchen drawers, but if you had, you would have seen a nightmare. So, right, everybody's got that junk drawer in their kitchen. Oh, yeah. And that's what the MDL looks like, right? It's everything you're looking for, but it's just not in a state where you can go, I can't tell you, go to the third drawer on the left and get my, keys. You open it up and you're like, there are 200 loose keys, but above that are a bunch of unpaid parking tickets. So like, what am I doing with this? And that's sort of what we're looking at. So then we spend the majority of our time trying to figure out how to go and get stuff. That's not the point. And then they want us to go from there to a state where it can be activated. And that's kind of skipping the core steps. It's like, yeah, I really want to be ready to play in the soccer game, but I'm only going to drink Red Bull and eat beef jerky for a week. That's not the way to prepare for the game. That's the way to prepare for maybe a weird afternoon, but you're not going to be, ready to go and run 10, 11 kilometers at pace or have the right mentality to make decisions once you're exhausted. So organizations that pursue that usually do so because that's where the pipelines exist. It doesn't require opening up a ticket with IT, because when you open up a ticket like this with IT, it triggers these 8 people to get involved, and they're great. We love working with them on things that are strategic and enterprise grade, but now we have to get on the calendar with these 8 people that are, again, now you start fanning this thing out. It becomes a gigantic activity just to make a small decision or a smallish decision on how to bring in data and mature it so that it can be staged, in a mart to be activated, by like a CDP or something, or a CRM or whatever AI or ML platform you want to use. You just can't do those things directly that way without a lot of, ad hoc transformations and things of that nature. So it's not really a strategy. It's really more just like a bunch of activities, and they're not unified. So the data unification piece is twofold, really. It's one, having the data unified so that you can use it to be purpose driven, and the other is to have your organization unified in order to support and make decisions that drive that forward. And it begins kind of back to the alignment piece. You don't do this just to have it, right? Enablement is, you can't demonstrate a database, right? You can't. You can show that there's things there, but that's not a demonstration. So to be demonstrable, you have to have a use case. There has to be an activation of that stuff. And so if you work backwards, it's a part of that selection of problems. Hey, we have like partial attribution or last touch attribution, but we want multi-touch attribution. Well, how would we do that? Well, let's look at the data that you'd require. Okay. And then just kind of working backwards, and you figure out that's what the project is. Okay.
Right.
We actually bring in all the data that we need. It's all in this MDL, but maybe it's not coming in at the right time or in the right way. So how would we do that from here? Or do we go back to the raw data feed and bring it in to a more modern and sophisticated and maybe complex but not complicated solution to bring that data into the activation layer? So I'd say that's the big one, right? So the data availability, is it there? Does it have the right quality? Does it have enough volume to drive the use case? And then the unification piece is, can we get it into the right stage so that it can be used in the right way at the right time? And it's about timing, and it's about criticality. And it goes twofold. One, are we doing it in the market? And then is there that automated feedback loop? Right? Are we also bring in event data to determine the things? Do we have not necessarily the capability to understand what KPI we need? Do we have the capability to even measure enough metrics to create that insight? And sometimes you don't. And so you have to go in and get another additional data source, which might require a new contract, a new vendor, and all this stuff. And it's part of it, but it's worth doing because you have a specific use case that you're going after, and you build the value of that use case to contain all of the enablement work that goes into it, including those new contracts and the time to do it. And if you follow that process, and it can be a bit laborious at first, but it becomes muscle memory. And then you've got the capability to be an organization that operates effectively with decisions and activation. And then you have a data layer, a data foundation that allows you to do that also with your MarTech stack, so that the market also can be, respond to the market, predict the market, and then also measure the market's response to what you're doing.
Okay, I have to ask, we couldn't be doing this podcast in 2026 if we didn't bring up AI.
Oh, cool.
So tell me, I get the problems that you're outlining. Maybe what's changing in light of AI and companies, desires to use AI. Is this all the same problems? Is it a different set of problems?
Yeah, I mean, we use AI and ML platforms as part of the activation layer for a data foundation. AI isn't going to solve an operational problem. If you have that operational problem, you probably also have a similar issue with how you're using data and bringing it in at that moment. So you do sort of have to have the right diet to compete. Even, if you look at AI as being just another activation layer, whether it's, using it for marketing ops or using it for some other purpose, you still have to have the things, everything sort of contained and organized and kind of at that lather, rinse, repeat stage so that your organization can scale. So if you bring in like, data enough to do like sort of the traditional, marketing ROI, multi-touch attribution, mixed modeling, that's great. And that usually includes most data that you'd have in marketing. But if it's ad hoc use cases, right? If it's not something that can be brought in and unified and scaled as a pattern of development, then your AI layer is going to be compromised with that as well, because maybe you're giving it what it wants from a volumetric perspective, and maybe the names of the things you're feeding it are right from the required data to do it. But is it compromised? Is the quality there? And the answer is difficult to say without an example, but or a specific example. But one of the things that I've been brought into more and more and more is, hey, how do we use agentic AI to run our business more effectively? Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. And I think it's one that my favorite one, because I think about it, generative AI as a great demonstration of what great data and great AI, capabilities can do. But now we have to translate that back into the enterprise. And that's not the use case. So one of the challenges of AI, I think, is how do you demonstrate agentic decisioning at the operations layer? Well, it'd be hard to make a sizzle reel for that, right? It's not quite the same as generating some amazing, visual or audio content based off that. So, but that's where the investment is. That's where the interest is. And that's, again, one where now you're looking at potential multiple lines of business. So if you're in an organization in like healthcare, pharma, banking, you're looking at some real challenges with being able to do things across those lines of business or those different, subcategories within the logo. And that's where clean rooms come into play. And that's where a different, not a different approach, but a different solution. So it's not necessarily we have one package and it's for everybody. The concept is, this is still leading with strong management consulting and then backed by quals with data engineering and data science that can deliver that. So I would say the AI aspect is the same challenge, similar challenge, but then also making it demonstrable with the right use case.
Yep. And
then taking into consideration the target state. So it might be about combining these two lines of business to do some cool, like for a bank, if they're also not a bank necessarily, but like a financial institution, if they have a credit card offer, right, that makes sense for somebody based off of the event data from visiting a website, that makes, okay, great, let's serve that content. But are they also being served that a competing credit card by the same company from a different thing? So that cannibalization is a primary use case for when we would want to use AI to suppress those things. But it also comes down to those different lines of business. Is that customer a personal customer, or are they representing their company? Because those are completely distinct lines of business. And it goes even more complicated if they're a high net worth individual, right? So if their net worth is, a lot, and they have a whole different, set of operations that affect them. So now you've got three lines of business potentially. If you're a high net worth individual and you're still employed, say like the CFO or CEO of a great business like ours, then maybe you're an entity that is represented both as a personal person and then also as the company, and maybe you want to do something internationally. You want to buy some property abroad. Now you're three different people. So how do those lines of business work? So if you're working on an application for you're not going to have to apply for a mortgage, but the rest of us might. That process of buying your new flat in Berlin, if you're going to buy that apartment abroad, there's a lot of things that go into that besides just being a candidate that's eligible to buy the property. There's also like FX protection, or like how's the exchange rate going to affect your mortgage over the course of a month or a year? And then like how does that get affected? Well, now that's a whole different entity, the lending entity and currency and all these different things have to work together. But PII, like you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Right. So the agentic aspect of that means that individual has to be identified and recognized and unified in an activated way. Otherwise, Kevin's going to be, looking for the documentation for his new apartment, and then he's also getting served offers for a credit card with a limit up to but not exceeding $1,100. And he's just like, that's just noise. So we don't want to like inundate that high net worth individual, or even just a regular, schmo like me, when you're banking or when you're visiting the doctor's office or you're filing a claim for insurance or you're doing those things. You don't want to be inundated with noise. And I would say like that's one of the core things that's happening is with AI that is a pretty simple way to use that is to have that decision transition. And again, it doesn't have to be that the activation of it is just automated. It could just be like, oh, now it's a trigger in our CRM. I know I need to convene a conversation with Jake and Ryan to make sure that, Kevin is allowed to actually buy property in Germany.
I think also it's interesting when you guys come over for dinner to my flat in Berlin, we're going to have Red Bull Ocean Spray and beef jerky.
And it's going to be really,
that is already on the menu. Right. So I just want to make sure we got through that noise of that. But
I feel like this may be one of those instances we're going to have a part 2 with Paul because we are nearing time here, and I want to make sure we all kind of get our final thoughts in. But gosh, I feel like there's so much, I'm sure you all in this room have heard it, but when I try to describe to my friends about like what a data foundation is, I'm like, imagine you're building the house, right? You have a team of designers and architects going in to do design. You have to prep the foundation, and you got to build the foundation to support what your vision is for what's actually going to function in that house, right? So whether it's like the electricity voltage for setting up a smart home or if you have an electric car, all of those things kind of go into how do we actually build that foundation to support the cool stuff we want to do in the house. Yeah. And that's a really easy way for them to understand like, oh, now I see why that's so important, because you look at, for instance, my neighborhood right now, every house getting sold is getting torn down. Some people are rebuilding the foundation. Some people are building mega mansions on top of what was a 1-story foundation. And I kid you not, all of those houses that got built on the previous foundation have had people digging tunnels underneath their houses within a year to fix those types of issues. So, that's I guess my way of trying to simplify kind of everything we've talked about here for somebody who's curious about like, what is it really kind of what we're talking about here, and like establishing this alignment first of like what the design and like what are the things that we want to do, but then also then like kind of bringing in the foundational tech to actually build the foundation out to support.
Yeah, Ryan, I would go, obviously that's a great analogy to get the conversation started. And I think another one that we can use, so what y'all may not know this, but Kevin, in his younger days, was an exceptional trombonist. So he'll appreciate the music aspect of this. So I also look at it as...
I don't know what's real.
Is it true?
It's true.
All right.
Yeah. Maybe not the exceptional.
I was going to say the exceptional part.
The exceptional part. I did have trombone. I still have one. Yeah. Let's see.
Next episode.
Yeah. So I look at it as well as when we think about music, we have all the notes that we could possibly play. Right. We're in an orchestra, but like, how do we know what to play? Well, it's organized on a sheet of paper. Right. How do we know when to do stuff? Well, of course, the paper tells us what to do, but there has to be something that tells us when the concert starts and what tempo to play at. That's going to be responsive to the market, right? That's the orchestra and the conductor. Like the term orchestration in data and marketing and automation didn't exist before this analogy. So these are terms taken from that world and used in that manner. And that's where you can think of it. Okay, well, the data itself might be all the different, parts that might exist for the low brass section, trombones, tubas, etc. And then it could be also things for the flutes, the piano, the harpsichord, whatever. But those things aren't cohesive until there's something putting it together in a use case, right? Rite of spring, whatever you want to call it. It's still that still needs to happen. So of course that foundational layer is, hey, we're competent musicians. We showed up. We're sitting in our seats. We're ready to go. We have our tuxedos on. And he and I would be wearing the tuxedos from Dumb and Dumber.
Kevin is getting beat up this episode.
Oh no, I'm dumber.
Glad we sat over here.
Right? Yeah. Well, we didn't shower, so
that's the big part of it. But in any case, like I would say, like those are two ways that you can easily make that analogy to folks. So the house, it's the music, it's really anything that requires multi-stage coordination or multi-phase coordination for something to happen that's pleasing. And the market, of course, is the audience. A conductor knows what the audience is doing; he can feel it, and so he's not going to deviate really too far off the page. But he's going to be putting things into the tempo and into the emphasis with his arms that's telling someone to, okay, when it says fortissimo and you want to play loud, my arms and body are telling you to make that 2 Fs, not 1 F. Or let's bring it down a little bit more. Someone's coughing. Let's bring it up again. And that's the way, I sort of think of it as well.
Amazing. Kevin, Jake, any other final thoughts before we wrap up here with Paul? Again, I'm fully anticipating a part 2 with a trombone, and maybe you can bring up a mixing setup so we can just start a little band. But
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of threads where to pull. It's gonna be interesting to see where this goes. One of the things is maybe a slightly. It's not so much about the implications, Paul, and the team here of what we're talking about. But one of the things I've been interesting right now at this moment, outside of the World Cup in the U.S., is just this. You've got all this data. One of the hopes and what we expect and what we're seeing is now there's so much more, it's so much easier to access. It's different structures, different elements, all the things we're talking about. Now you're overlaying that with now a lot more concern about cost, a lot more concern about energy consumption, a lot more concern about those components. And so, sitting on this couch a year and a half ago, I would have been like, man, these tools are going to allow us to really be able to not do up all the cleanup work, all the things that you were suggesting, indirectly that you really have to happen for an organization to take advantage of their data. And this is going to be a cheat code for us to be able to not have to do that. And now we're running into potentially either an actual regulatory environment or a perception reality. I don't know exactly where it's going to all shake up. That's going to still require companies to go back and do the hard work of structure, organization, cleanup. And so it's not surprising, but I just don't know if I completely anticipated we'd be here so fast or this moment. And now thinking about our clients, thinking about just how do we manage a world again of constraint that is maybe a bit artificially constrained, but it is still an ongoing concern. So different thread. I mean, all the elements of what you said, how companies can use what you're talking about, all those elements, but just how do you continue to operationalize that, do that, and evolve. And so those are my closing thoughts. Not nearly as insightful as what Paul's been sharing, but I think it's going to be intriguing for us as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, I wrote 3 things down. It's not nearly as macro as where Kevin was going, but I did like 3 things that you said because I think they echo the themes that we've heard from past guests. So, back to your finding the signal, maybe I'm looking for the through line, but one was the notion of, look, we start with all of these technology challenges, but it all comes back to what's the strategy? What are the priorities of the organization? Yeah. We've definitely heard that before. If I even go back to, I think we had Ellen on, a couple of months ago, and she was beating a similar drum. And then second, as much as we hear about AI, I like the point that you were making, maybe a little bit implicitly, that a lot of the underlying challenges of how do you get the value out of AI come back to the pieces around the AI. One, of course, being the data, but the other being the culture. Yeah. And then this is, you didn't say this explicitly, but it was a good reminder to me of, I like the pragmatism of your focus on use cases when you're thinking about problems here. So those are my big takeaways.
Yeah, I would say, we've heard sentiments of all those things kind of wrapped into one in this episode, which is why I think it was a good timing to have you on, Paul, to kind of tie it all together, to orchestrate, if you will, to have the gusto.
Are you the referee blowing the whistle to end the game?
I'm not blowing any whistle. We can go as long as we want. I know y'all's calendars are pretty slammed.
Yeah.
And I just want to be respectful of that.
I'm happy to come back if you guys want me again. Check the numbers. I don't know what the market's going to do to this episode, but I'm sure it'll be going off like gangbusters.
There you go. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. For myself, for Ryan, for Kevin, for Jake, almost forgot my name. This has been another edition of the Pure Signal Podcast, reminding you to what, Jake?
Do you want to do that one again?
No, we'll keep it in.
Okay. Be bold and be curious.
Perfect. Thanks. We'll see you next time.